Welcome everyone to our first of 2025 webinar where we're going to talk about what's next for 340B. This is our first webinar since our last one back in November. So I want to wish you all a happy New Year's, although it feels like 2024 was 6 months ago. I don't know if that's the same feeling for you. I hope you're all staying warm. If you're in the East Coast, you're probably going through the cold weather and cold fronts that we're facing here. I'm in Pennsylvania, and it was 0 degrees this morning. So I hope you're staying warm. 340B has not stopped surprising us. All right. It's only been a few weeks into the new year, and we already have so much news, so much things to talk about. So I want to go right into what's next for 340B in 2025. And I want to share with you my top 5 predictions for 2025. If those of you have been joining our webinars, we do one once a month. You know that I have spent a lot of time talking about contract pharmacy access bill, manufacturer restrictions, and a lot of other topics. So if you're joining us again, I want to welcome you. I want to thank you for continuing to support us and to join these webinars. And again, our goal is for these to be informative and to help you as you are a 340B professional managing a 340B program or consulting for entities or are in some other area of the field. So again, want to go ahead and get started. It is 2 o'clock. Let's get right into the content for today. All right, so want to start with a quick disclosure. The information that I'm going to present, including any analysis, interpretation, I'm going to talk about some legislation and some rules and some proposals. Those are all my opinions and my personal views from my perspective only. So these views do not necessarily reflect the official position or policies of PharmaForce or any of its affiliates. So have to say that, you have to get that out the way, as there's a lot of touchy subject that we're going to be discussing today. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the agenda? Let me lay out the agenda for today. So as the title of the presentation is and the webinar is my top 5 predictions, what's next for 340B in 2025. These are the 5 things I'm going to cover. A lot of the changes that I think we're going to see this year are going to encompass one of these sort of areas of major impact to 340B and to the 340B program and its operation. So number one, I want to give you an update on where we are with the contract pharmacy bills and a lot of shakeup that I think we're going to see there that is going to be positive and already has been positive. I want to talk about the rebates. So the rebate model, what's going on with that, give you sort of a summary of where we are today. I want to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. That's something that's going to come. We've already seen some battles related to that, and that's been tied to the rebate model that has been proposed by some of the manufacturers. So I want to share about that. I've spent a lot of time, I want to say our November webinar, I spent a lot of time talking about legislative action, things that are introduced in the House that are related to 340B, legislative changes, bills that are being discussed in the Senate that are related to 340B and major changes to the program. So I want to give you an update on where that is, where we are with that. And then lastly, I want to talk about this new federal oversight called Department of Government Efficiency. I want to share about some rumors, some thoughts on whether that could impact the 340B program in any way. So there is our agenda. So let's go ahead and get started with the contract pharmacy shakeup and access bill. So what are these? So let me just start with my 25 prediction. I'm going to start with the prediction, and then I'll tell you my reasonings why. All right. And you all can have your own prediction, and then we'll come back in 2026 and we'll see how wrong I was. So first, let's say I think that in 2025, contract pharmacy access bills will continue to expand across the nation, especially after the Supreme Court rejects to hear a challenge to the Arkansas pharmacy access law. So I think we're going to see so many more of these bills at the state levels that were being held back, in my opinion, waiting for some indication from the court that they would hold up scrutiny. And what we have seen, as you will see in a few minutes, is that has been the case And this is why I think this will be a big year for contract pharmacy access bills. So those of you that are in a state that has a contract pharmacy access legislation pass, you are probably benefiting from that and are seeing 340B pricing across more of your pharmacy network versus covered entities that are in states where that has not been introduced, passed. We had one state where made it to the governor and it was vetoed. So there's a lot of action going on related to this. If you're in one of those states, I've been encouraging covered entities to find a way to get involved and to help push that forward in a positive and meaningful way. Quick recap, manufacturer restrictions, there's at least 37 of them in some way, shape, or form that are restricting 340B pricing to covered entities via contract pharmacy arrangement. So these, by now, I don't have to go into details of what these are because I think we know them very well, but they are creating burdens, if operational burdens for covered entities to access 340B pricing, whether it is through the submission of data or whether it is that you can only obtain 340B pricing to an in-house pharmacy. It has really caused an uproar in our industry. Those of you that work at a covered entity, I mean, this has, I'm talking to covered entities, well, this has added 20 to 30 hours more a week at a minimum of additional work in auditing and submitting claims and obtaining claims from multiple TPAs, submitting that and then having it rejected, going back and forth with the vendor on how to resolve pricing, trying to get pricing loaded to your drug catalog. So it has been a very cumbersome, a very difficult, a very complex thing to navigate for many covered entities. And that continues to be the case. That was the case in 2024. Where we saw some of them evolve, some of them change, some of them loosen a little bit. But pretty much we still see these manufacturer restrictions having the same sort of proposals to limit 340B pricing. What the contract pharmacy state bills that are now being passed and have been passed in some states is the state of Arkansas. If you're here, if there's any covered entities from that state, your state has been leading the nation in this. So we're thankful for the state of Arkansas. But these bills require 340B prices for outpatient drugs at contract pharmacies. These bills are even have penalties for non-compliance for manufacturers that do not comply with this. Some states have started to impose some of these fines and penalties for some manufacturers. So we have seen these bills be very, very pro-covered entity and really helping covered entities reduce the impact of these manufacturer restrictions. They removed the restrictions and emphasized the goal of the 340B program to stretch federal resources. So these bills have been very, very positive for many entities. I like to think of these bills as a lifeline. There's many entities that I've talked to personally as being in the third-party administrator space that have said, you know, these bills have prevented us from losing millions of dollars in 340B savings that could have significantly impacted our operation. So these bills continue to be a true lifeline for covered entities. There was this, and I hope you can see this title here because it downloaded a little bit blurry here, but the Supreme Court on December 9th, 2024, so a little bit over a month ago, the Supreme Court declined to hear a pharma challenge to the Arkansas landmark 340B pharmacy access. I want to give a shout out to our friends at 340B Report for reporting this. But in my opinion, and what has been shared in a lot of the information that has been put out, this was a fundamental decision that sort of fuel the contract pharmacy access bills that we're going to see in 2025. So I think many people were kind of sitting on the sideline and waiting to see what. There's so many lawsuits going around. We're waiting to see how those would shake out. And all have not been finalized. In 2025, we're going to see something interesting here. So this is what, at the end of 2024, this is where contract pharmacy access bills were actually passed and enacted. There are many other states where a bill was introduced But these were sort of the ones where there was some sort of law enacted that helped covered entities. And 340B report has a great resource. Encourage you all to sign up for that if you have not. That has a tracker of tracking where these bills are introduced, where they have been enacted, and things like that. Well, we've seen something very interesting. So this news had moved so fast, I had to change my slides like an hour ago. So these are now all the states. So if you're in any of these states, you want to get familiar with how that bill is going to, if it passes, help you expand your 340B program, and I don't even mean expand, but how that bill will help alleviate the restrictions that have been in place for the last couple of years on covered entities. So as you can see here on the map, just today is the 22nd of January, so we're 3 weeks into the year, and you already have seen a tremendous amount of movement in these bills being introduced in 2025 because of, in my opinion, the Supreme Court decision to deny the Arkansas hearing a challenge against the Arkansas bill. So I think we're going to see more of these. We're going to see a lot more of these. If you are in a state where these bills are introduced or being discussed, I encourage you to get involved with that. Last summer of 2024, I want to say around June, July, I had a gentleman on our webinar who I interviewed that played a role. He was from the Rural Health Association in the state of Mississippi, and he helped play a role in getting this bill through their state legislature, getting it to the governor to sign. And it was a really cool story. It was a really cool story of someone understanding the challenge, understanding how patients were affected, then being involved in educating and ultimately helping pass this bill that has been very good for covered entities in the state of Mississippi. So again, I want to encourage you all to get involved as much as you can. When I worked on the covered entity side, we had a department that was involved in policy and things like that, and we would always work with that department to make sure that the impact of 340B was shared and communicated. So we're going to see more of this. To be fair, I did make my prediction slide before this big wave, so I think I got a semi right, and I'll take some credit now. But I think this is going to be the new trend. I think what's happening is covered entities and states are realizing that the chances of getting something at a federal level is very, very slim. So states are taking, this approach in order to help providers in their areas and in their communities to access these 340B savings that many believe are being restricted and restricted against the intent of the Public Health Services Act law that was passed that allowed the 340B program to be what it is today. So good news here, really good news. And I wanted to start with some really good news on this webinar. I think I will keep you updated as more of these things progress and more of these challenges. The unfortunate thing is there's so many lawsuits, it's hard to keep up of who's suing who these days. Like it will take up an entire slide to put together how many lawsuits are going on between manufacturers and HRSA and states and manufacturers and pharma groups and states and everybody in between. Everyone's getting sued. So this is a time where it's good to be a lawyer, I guess, if you're involved in any of this. All right, so another thing that really was a big topic of debate at the end of 2024. This is not new. This has been around, this discussion, this topic, this concept has been around 340B for several years now, but it really took, we're really, really close to seeing this come alive, I would say from August to December of 2024. So what we saw was, and to give you a quick timeline of this is what we saw were covered manufacturers proposing this rebate model. and I will go more into what it does. But this rebate model essentially changes the way 340B savings is obtained. Now, here's my prediction for 2025, and I'll explain to you why I think this will happen. Manufacturers have asked HRSA to approve a rebate model, and the rebate model has not been approved by HRSA. I think, here's my prediction, the rebate model will be implemented at a minimum to the IRA of negotiated drugs, and it will force changes to the 340B program. So I think it will happen in some capacity. It's hard to know because I think that we don't know the position, the 340B position of many of the leaders that are coming into HHS. If confirmed, Robert F. Kennedy, Dr. Mehmet Oz, who will be the head of CMS, and others who will be part of shaping up HHS. We don't have direct knowledge of their thoughts and views on the 340B program, but I do think that there will be some sort of concession in that a type of rebate model will be approved. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong because as you will see in a little bit, it's a very, very complex model. I'm going to give you a quick sort of, 40,000 feet overview of what it is for those of you that are not aware and in the details of what this is. Essentially, it's a new mechanism to obtain 340B savings. So what manufacturers are proposing is that instead of you getting 340B savings on the front end through having a 340B account, you will obtain the 340B products, if you will, if we can call them that, at a retail pricing. So you will pay full retail price at the beginning with the hopes that as long as you submit the rebate quickly enough, that then you're going to get payment from the manufacturer and you don't have to actually foot the bill for the product. So it is, the claims are, and this is why I say these are the claims from pro advocates of a rebate model, is that it provides faster payments to covered entities. So the promise is that in 15 days, you're going to get paid the difference between the retail pricing and that 340B price, that you were going to get paid essentially your savings amount, that it will lower inventory costs for covered entities and pharmacies, that it will lead to higher revenue and improved cash flow. I don't know about that. And number 4 is that it resolves the Inflation Reduction Act negotiated drugs issue. I'll explain more about it because that was a little bit complicated to understand. So I'll do my best to explain why. Point number 4 is probably very, very critical, a very critical point in seeing a rebate model potentially approved. So is this new? No. So there was a company named Calderos. Those of you who have been in the 340B program like I have for over a decade would know that there was a time where, and maybe it still happens today, where this company Calderos was doing audits and offering other services and have been proposing a model like this since early 2020, maybe even before then. Beacon is also another company that's offering this rebate model. It's called a rebate model. It's called a credit model. So there's a couple different names to it. Below, you're going to see some of the manufacturers that are proposing this, that are sort of behind this approach. It's all over the place. Some manufacturers are saying only for these IRA drugs. Some manufacturers are saying for everything, we're going to do this rebate model. If you were keeping up with everything at the end of the year in 2024, there was a manufacturer that said, hey, effective January, we're going to do this rebate model and it's going to apply to all hospitals. And here's the specs of all the data you need to send us, and we're moving forward. And then HRSA came out and said, no, you're not. You're not doing that. And we will, we potentially would kick you out of Medicaid and Medicare if you did that. So there's a lot of contention there, a lot of fights there. This could be a very, very significant, this could change 340B as we know it. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. It's a very, very complex model, and it's very different than what we know and how 340B operates today. So it presents a lot of challenges. I try to put together this graphic to explain sort of, what this looks like. So essentially, the vendor now becomes another third-party administrator platform. That's the only way that I can explain it. So you still, as a covered entity, you still need a TPA, right? You have a TPA. Now you have to get this. Now you have to work with this other vendor. And then this vendor, who is a representative of the manufacturer, similar to the 340B ESP model that is implemented today, that many of you are familiar with, this vendor will then require a significant amount of data feeds from covered entities, okay, in order to literally do a qualification of whether you should get the credit or not. All right. So again, this is really complex stuff. So essentially, you are providing three categories of data now. So not just one file, right? So 340B ESP is generally one file with your claims data. There's some require invoicing information and stuff like that. And that alone presents a significant amount of challenges to covered entities that are in some ways almost impossible to really keep up with and do it right and do it justice. This model now adds a 340B eligible claims file similar to what's submitted to ESP with the purchasing data tied to it. It adds a claim plus encounter file. So essentially you have to show that the claim was tied to an encounter in the data submission or in the way that you're submitting the data. Then you have additional information being asked for. If you look at the data specs, as this is public, you can see what one of the manufacturers proposed. But if you look at the data specs, they're asking for HCPCS code, they're asking for diagnosis codes. I mean, they're asking for some data that are not generally part of a normal traditional 340B contract pharmacy qualification logic. Then, if that's not enough, then this will also apply to your drug utilizations on your mixed use side. So you're now going to have to submit all of that data of outpatient administrations, eligible administrations on your mixed use side and tie invoicing data to that as well, which presents a whole nother complication I'm not going to get into. But it doesn't end there. Then you also have to send the purchasing data that's tied to the claims and the drug utilization. And that purchasing data has to have happened at retail or WAC pricing. It can't happen at GPO. And you have to submit it as soon as possible so that you can get the rebate in time so that you can pay your wholesaler bill. And it applies to contract pharmacy, in-house pharmacies, entity-owned pharmacies, and all of your mixed-use 340B program. So I'll stop there because that was a mouthful. My point in saying this is an incredibly complex model. It will be very difficult for entities en masse to adopt this model in a way that will not hurt their 340B program savings. All right. So I hope that this doesn't go through even at a large scale because it really will it really will make it difficult for covenant entities to achieve savings. Now, it doesn't end there. Once you submit all this data, then the vendor is now going to add their own qualification of the rebate you submitted. So the vendor now is going to review your data. One of the data specs that I read has 24 different configurations. 24 different configurations of checks that can be configured at this vendor before the credit is paid to the covered entity, right? So in a perfect world, the vendor is saying, everything will be paid in 14 days. There's no problem. It's going to be better. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. But we who have been in the weeds and are in the weeds of 340B know it's not that simple. So that's a bit about the rebate model. So I still think I don't think that this will happen at a mass scale, but perhaps there's an opportunity where this happens on these products that are negotiated under the Inflation Reduction Act that this is a mechanism for the manufacturer to comply with that. So we'll see what happens. But that is my thoughts on that. All right, so now the Inflation Reduction Act. You're going to hear more about this. If you haven't heard about this just yet, as a 340B covered entity and how it impacts you, you're going to hear more about this year. This is coming. I think the IRA will force the 340B program to change, and I predict HRSA will approve a rebate model. I think it will happen on a limited basis, though. That's sort of my prediction, that it will happen, but it will happen on a limited basis. I hope I am wrong about this prediction, but I think it will happen because of the implications and difficulty of the compliance with the Inflation Reduction Act. So basically, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in 2022 under the previous administration. And basically, it allows for the negotiation of drugs between Medicare and manufacturers, so that now Medicare is going to pay the maximum fair price. You're going to hear that word, the MFP, the maximum fair price. And essentially, the purpose is to lower Medicare drug costs. So essentially, the government now says, hey, we're going to negotiate with the manufacturers. We're not going to pay, the full price for the drug. We're going to negotiate our own prices, and then the manufacturers then have to basically give a rebate to the pharmacies who got reimbursed for below what the cost of that product is. Okay, so that is the essential purpose of the piece of legislation. The Inflation Reduction Act is a bigger law, but the part that it applies to this is that it begins in January 1st of 2026. CMS has rejected providing a mechanism for doing this, has essentially put it on the manufacturers to figure it out. And that is where we're now faced with challenges, in that it impacts the 340B program. So pharmacies buy the drug at WAC, or full retail, or some other pricing, has it on their shelf, but then are reimbursed at the maximum fair price, which is below retail, and then the manufacturers have to cover that gap in the form of a rebate, check, or wire, however you want to think about it. But the problem is the pharmacies have to now go and request this rebate, or this credit, or this reimbursement. Okay, so that has implications on 340B. I mean, the major implication is how do you comply with this when you have in-house pharmacies? How do you comply with this when you have contract pharmacies? What if contract pharmacies are not obtaining the rebate and want to remove these drugs from 340B eligibility? What would that do to 340B contract pharmacy arrangements? So there's the manufacturers that have to have the compliance systems and to figure this out. The manufacturers are saying, hey, we think that this rebate model fixes this, but hers is saying, no, we're not allowing that, and we're not approving that. You got the pharmacies who now have this new process that they don't have today, that doesn't exist, that if they're going to process a Medicare prescription, they now have to receive this underpayment, if you will, but then go to the manufacturers to obtain a rebate, and there's no real mechanism for that. And I think that will get figured out, but I don't see this being very easy, and a very easy process for pharmacies to now. If you're an independent pharmacy and you have to deal with this is a headache to deal with, in a way. You have entities who are now now are facing this, who if an entity now has to go and do the same thing, if you own a pharmacy, and for different types of drugs, for Part B drugs and things like that, you now have to go through this process too. So it's a pain, and it's going to be something that we will see how it shakes out in the future. All right, so moving on to our next topic. Our next topic is legislative action forecast. So if you have been following the news, you have seen the last couple of days, we have a new administration. That new administration is now going to have to get key executives and key people in leadership positions approved by the Senate, so that they can go and lead their respective organizations, like HHS, for example, which is the Health and Human Services. There are rumors related to 340B right now. If you missed, in December, there was a battle with this continuing resolution bill that was going to be passed, to extend the government. There was Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency and a lot of other political advocates pushing back against this bill. This bill had some 340B language and PBM language embedded in it. It was a huge bill, and it had some 340B language embedded in it, and that was sort of, with a massive amount of pushback that the House of Representatives received, the bill was reduced and made shorter. So is that the future of 340B? That's going to be, they're going to try to stick it into some massive bill, and then it's going to go into this, massive battle. We will see. I'm not sure. But what I will say is I do believe, all right, and I'm saying this as someone who was around, back in 2016, 2017, when the mega guidance was supposed to come out and there were worries about 340B legislation. I do think if there was ever a year and there was ever a time where 340B reform could be passed, I think it's now. I do. I do think, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I do think that the Sustained 340B Act has a great chance of passing because of John Thune, who is the head of the Senate now, is a co-sponsor of that bill and has a lot of power to set the agenda, the legislative agenda in the Senate. So I do think that there's a possibility, and I go as far as making this prediction that we will see 340B reform, some type of 340B reform, at a federal level. So you guys hold me to that prediction. If 2026 comes around and nothing happened in 340B, then I'm gonna have egg on my face. But that I'm sticking to that. I'm sticking to that prediction. All right. So here's a quick overview of where we are. There are several bills that are introduced in the House of Representatives. There's HR 44. This is a newer bill introduced recently, that amends, basically it's an amendment to add rural emergency hospital to the list of eligible entities. There's a typo there. It's January 16th, 2025 that this bill got introduced. So I apologize for that. There's a typo there. But this bill is looking to add on about 30 covered entities that are rural emergency hospitals to the covered entity eligible list. There's a 340B Access Act in May 28th, 2024. There's a 340B Patients Act that was introduced March 12th, 2024. The 340B Patients Act, that is the favorite bill of providers at large because it only addresses, for the most part, that 340B contract pharmacy network arrangements should not have pricing restrictions. It's a very limited bill to that specific topic. The HR 8574 is a little bit more expansive bill that has been criticized for being, not being very much in favor of hospitals and instead favoring communities and health centers and grantees. But it's one thing that has not been introduced that I think, most hopeful for, understanding that there will have to be some sort of concession. I think there'll be some sort of concession, but the Sustained 340B Act is a more comprehensive overhaul. This was a bill that, if you have been following my webinars in 2024, I talked about a lot, where there was a request for information from the Senate. It's a bipartisan bill that has 6 senators, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats who were wanting to pass a comprehensive 340B legislation that addresses both things that manufacturers want and things that providers want. Some of the things in this bill are 340B transparency, so basically expanding upon some of the reporting things that we have seen at a state level, like in Minnesota, where entities have now to report savings and things like that. The contract pharmacy access is reinstated and written into law. So essentially, undoes the restrictions that manufacturers have put in place. And this one, which is very interesting, that maybe you have seen, maybe you haven't, but there's a national clearinghouse language in this bill to address duplicate discounts, which I think is one of the reasons why this bill has such a high chance of getting passed. Okay, there's this national clearinghouse is something that, from my understanding of having conversations with people that are involved with this bill, that are working with folks in Congress to write this bill, and have worked with folks in Congress to write this bill, the national clearinghouse is something that manufacturers support, and will love to see pass. So I think that the sustained 340, let's keep an eye on it. We'll know in the first few months of this administration if there's an appetite for 340B legislation. I think we'll know by May or June if there's some. It's one of the key committee members has already said they're going to attempt to do some 340B legislation, in the next few months. So we'll see. We'll see. There's a lot of unknown here, and a lot of questions. So we'll see what happens. But I am hopeful and optimistic that if there will be a change to the 340B program at a federal level, that it will be under a bill like the Sustained 340B Act. All right, so wow, that was a lot. I hope you are enjoying all this information, but definitely sharing a lot of information today to level set us for the year, and then we'll maybe have additional webinars to break some of these things down even more granular. All right, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the new federal oversight. Could this be a wild card thing that could impact 340B? There have certainly been some rumors about this. I'm going to say no. I don't think that the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, will have an impact on the 340B program. The 340B program doesn't cost taxpayers money in a major sense, other than, I guess, the budget that will be for the Office of Pharmacy Affairs to oversee the program and things like that. But the 340B savings are a result of manufacturers selling the products at a lower prices to covered entities. So I don't think that this is a program that will be targeted by the Department of Government Efficiency. Why do I say that? I say that because there have been rumors that under HHS, there could be a major realignment of where agencies sit in order to make it more efficient and more streamlined. So that's why I wanted to bring this up. That has been mentioned. The Department of Government Efficiency and its leader, Elon Musk, has played a key role in ensuring that continuing resolution bill didn't get passed in 2024 in December that had 340B transparency. I wouldn't say that most providers were in favor of that anyways, but my point is that there was 340B language, PBM language. I don't think that was on anyone's mind as a reason to push back against that bill, but 340B is probably something that will be tagged on to, another massive bill that Congress may try to pass. So the good is that 340B has bipartisan support. All right. So the DOGE is working with members of Congress. 340B has bipartisan support. I think there's a big anti-big pharma sentiment, if I could use that language, in the new administration and some of the leaders that are going to be at the head of HHS. Again, we don't have direct quotes from Robert F. Kennedy or Dr. Oz or others that are part of the administration on 340B per se, and that could be a good thing. But I think that that's different than the first term, where in the first term of President Trump's administration, there were people at the head of those agencies that had worked for pharmaceutical companies, and that was something that administration was criticized for, in having pharmaceutical executives being head of some of these agencies that then did things that were in a way opposed to the 340B program. As I said before, the 340B program does not cost taxpayer money. And just hot off the press, the official executive order on the Department of Government Efficiency says that its intention is to focus on modernizing federal technology and software. So there's been some rumors that has this been sold as a kind of bigger effort to go and find ways across the entire federal government and to cut departments, to cut this and cut that. But it looks like it's much more focused on modernizing federal technology and software, which could be a very, streamlined target of things across the government. So we will see. Now, what are the bad? There's rumors, as I mentioned, that federal agencies may be streamlined. I think some of those things are sort of going away. There's the influence of Elon Musk, and I wouldn't just call out Elon Musk, but I would say there are folks as part of the Department of Government Efficiency that played a key role in anti-340B messaging. So there's been some articles written. Again, I want to just say again, a big credit to our friends at 340B Report, such a great resource. But there have been some articles written that someone that was tied to a pact that basically targeted lawmakers who, especially Republicans who were supporting 340B program, put out commercials that the 340B program was used for illegal immigrants only and things like that, that sort of, what was directly involved in anti-340B messaging is now a key player at the Department of Government Efficiency. So do with that what you will. I don't know that means anything other than there's someone there that has an understanding of 340B in that department. So with that being said, I hope that you enjoyed a lot of the content that was shared today. Here's a couple ways you get in touch with us. So this presentation will be posted on our YouTube channel, and usually within 48 hours, we'll get this reviewed by our marketing team, get it posted on our YouTube channel. You can get in touch with us at info@thepharmaforce.com. You can check out our website. We're going to be at these two upcoming conferences. So at the NAC Policy and Issues Forum, we're going to be there February the 5th through the 8th. Booth 619 will be at the 340B Coalition Conference, February 24th to the 26th at booth 103. So feel free to stop by. One of the things that I mentioned is in my November webinar, I said, if any of you will be interested in a podcast, if we launch one, and many of you voted yes. So we started a podcast. So there's a podcast called 340B Now. You can go to Spotify, type in 340B Now or PharmaForce, and you're going to see our podcast come up. I think we've done 3 episodes so far. It's a more informal discussion of the newest headlines, articles of the month. So what we do is we're going to try to do about 2 a month, just to put out, hey, here's what's going on. Here's the latest. Things are changing really fast. Here's what's going on in the 340B program, in healthcare, in pharmacy. We just did a really good, this one that you see on the screen is breaking down the rebate model. And I kind of went through the whole Sanofi letter and the rebate model proposal and all that. Usually under 30 minutes. There's another one that we did just talking about predictions in healthcare and the future of online pharmacies and independence and things like that, and telehealth, that I think will be really interesting. If you care to check that out, go to Spotify.com, type in 340B Now or PharmaForce, and go ahead and follow us, and we will be releasing more episodes very, very soon. All right, so with that being said, that sort of wraps up what I said. I do have some time to take some Q&A. I love to do the Q&A part with you all. So if anyone has any questions that you would like for me to answer, please put those in the Q&A. I see 2 of them here. So again, please post any questions that you have in the Q&A. If you want to unmute yourself and come up and talk to me, and we can discuss, certain questions that you might have, and you want to do that, please go ahead and do that. I would love that, just to discuss some of these interesting topics. So here we go. So Cheryl has a question. What about Judge Johnston's granted the Pharma Novartis AbbVie preliminary injunction, meaning that the WV Board of Pharmacy cannot enforce the provisions in the West Virginia Code created by? Won't that impact the expansion? Yeah, Cheryl. So in your state, that will be the case, most likely. What we have seen is some manufacturers are actually honoring the contract pharmacy access bills and are in the letters basically saying everything in this letter does not apply to states X, Y, and Z. So I will keep an eye on that. I'm sure there's going to be some manufacturers that are going to double down and say, all right, well, we're not going to provide 340B pricing. I wouldn't make that assumption just off of the decision. I will look to see if Novartis or AbbVie or whatever manufacturer in your specific state does not call out West Virginia as a state that's exempted from the restriction. So that would be what I would say as it relates to that. Let me see. Yes, another attendee. Will FarmForce provide support in creating the file and send the files to the vendor? Yeah, so actually at the 340B conference, I'm going to talk about, sort of give a breakdown how you as a covered entity, if you should be prepared in some way, shape, or form to pivot to this rebate model if it happens. Let me go back to my last slide real quick. Give me 1 second. You should be prepared, at least have an idea of, hey, what would I have to do if this was to happen, and kind of, because the sad part is a lot of these things have happened. It happened with the manufacturer restrictions where the manufacturer just announces it and you have 2 weeks, if that, to implement a new process, right? So yes, I think vendors, I think TPAs, I can speak on behalf of PharmaForce, will be very involved in helping covered entities navigate this, because ultimately we have a lot of that data for the normal processing of your 340B program. The interesting thing is that the way that the data is being requested is in ways that not every TPA works like that. In other words, not every TPA has the ability to do a model where it's a sort of like a pay on replenishment, where each claim unit is mapped to an invoice, right? So if your TPA is not able to do that, how complicated would that be to adapt to that process, right? So those would be some things that I encourage, entities to be prepared for. Maybe I should do a webinar on getting into in depth with that. Okay, another question is, can you speak to Caldero's current relationships with manufacturing? You know what? I don't. I got a question from an anonymous attendee. I don't know much about it, other than it seems that Caldero's customer are manufacturers. I can't comment anything beyond that. I can't comment as to, who supports them, if they're good or not. I don't know. It will be foolish of me to comment more than that, because I don't know them. Do you feel like manufacturers will increase requests to audit entities themselves? What's the impact? Yeah, I saw some recent articles that what we perceive as providers and players in this space, in the 340B space, as a successful restriction campaign, it seems like the manufacturers feel the opposite. It seems like the manufacturers do not feel like they have actually restricted the 340B program enough. So will we see increase in audits? Potentially. Yeah. I mean, I could certainly see that. If some of this rebate model stuff passes, there's now access to so much data that they have, that will that lead to additional requests and additional questions, and will they question now TPA logic and things like that? It's an interesting question to ask. I don't know. I don't know exactly, or have any indication that that will directly tie to more audits, but it could. It certainly could. Maureen asked, if the credit rebate model is implemented and drugs are purchased at WAC, how are covered entities addressing billing modifiers for fee-for-service Medicaid and Medicaid managed care plans? Maureen, that's a really good question. There's a lot of these questions related to that I have with this rebate model. For example, like, what happens on a referral capture situation where you might be capturing that claim, 30 days later, right? I think this situation of billing modifiers is another interesting one. I guess at the point of sale, you can still submit the modifier if we're talking about a contract pharmacy situation where you're submitting that 20 in the SEC. On the medical side, you're going to have to submit a modifier. These are all, Maureen, these are all questions that I think we've yet to be seen. And I think that this entire rebate model, I don't think anyone really understands the impact to the day-to-day. I really don't. I really don't think anyone really understands the impact to the day-to-day. Questions like yours. And I'm thinking, Maureen, maybe you're asking from a standpoint of, you're submitting those claims from a WAC, inventory, and you have to submit those billing modifiers. So yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, if you will, a lot of unknowns. Another question from anonymous attendee. What are your thoughts on the clearinghouse? Would it be something that we have no option but to join? Yeah, so I think what I have heard is, and this is interesting because I've had a few discussions with folks that are involved with some of the draft language in that bill and very heavily involved with the Sustain 340B Act. My understanding is that the manufacturers will love to have the National Clearinghouse passed because it takes away from the states to figure out the duplicate discount issue, and it makes it a standard, law across the nation. So it doesn't sound like it will be something optional, but it sounds like it will be, sort of the law, a new way of similar to the way some states do it. I'm sure you all have heard of the Oregon model, and there's some other states where you're submitting claims after the fact. You're submitting it to that state. There's sometimes a quarter behind, so that then those claims are not submitted for a rebate. One of the things that people don't know is the duplicate discount model from a manufacturer perspective. It's not only tied to Medicaid. So that's a little secret in the industry that I don't think a lot of people know is that the manufacturers are not just worried about Medicaid, they're also worried about the non-Medicaid transactions where they're paying PBMs or rebate on those drugs, but a 340B is also potentially being obtained. So there's a concern there on a grander scale that I think impacts the way that national clearinghouse discussion happens. Question from Neela. Neela says, uh, I've been told the CMS has rejected providing an implementation mechanism for MMP. That's right. Yep, pricing and place response on the manufacturer. Do you anticipate this will accelerate adoption? Yeah, so Neela, great question. Because CMS rejected providing an implementation mechanism and put it on the manufacturers, it's exactly why the manufacturers are pushing this rebate model. Because what they're saying is the rebate model is the way that we comply with the Inflation Reduction Act. That's why I made the prediction that I think that HRSA will approve the rebate model to some extent. Again, that's just my personal opinion from doing hours of research on this. That's just my personal opinion. So I think that that's what's going to happen. Otherwise, it's very difficult to comply with the way the Inflation Reduction Act sort of lays out how manufacturers have to pay the pharmacies the rebate without some sort of mechanism that's now on the manufacturers to figure out. So it's a little bit of a mess. It's a little bit of a mess. It only to be completely clear, it applies to specific NDCs that Medicare is negotiating. So it doesn't apply to everything. It applies to specific NDCs that fall under this Medicare negotiation. I think they started with 2 drugs and then are now expanding across others. Oh, one last question. Tanya Moore. Calderos alluded to a recent CMS policy that restricts how far back time frame that a manufacturer is allowed to go back with their good faith inquiries, but will not elaborate. I've gotten claims back to 2020 from them. Are you aware of the CMS? You know what? I'm not aware of that CMS policy. That's a really good point. I'm not aware of that CMS policy. I know that one of the things, again, this is just a recommendation, but because they are good faith inquiries, I have worked at covered entities where there was a policy on how to handle, those good faith inquiries, and maybe there were some where you participate, and maybe some others where, you choose not to participate. Either they go back, too far, or are making, assumptions about how you manage your 340B program that are incorrect and things like that. So, but again, I don't want to, that's just a recommendation of ways that I've seen entities do it in the past. All right. I think that's it. There's so many of you still here. Thank you so much for joining. I really hope that this was valuable and productive. Thank you for joining. We will see you again in February with a new topic on what's going on in 340B. Again, thank you so much. Have a great day. Stay warm. Happy New Year's. Once again, thanks everybody.